All right, we're in Chapter 9 of Helicopter Flying Handbook. Chapter 9 is Basic Flight Maneuvers. So we're going to go over, let's get some pictures before we start again in the hovering. We did hovering from just being straight on the ground, just coming up to a hover. We did hover forward flight. And using reference points. To maintain a straight ground attack, use 2 reference points in line and at some distance in front of the helicopter. Use a reference point here. The key to hovering sidewards is establishing at least 2 reference points that help maintain a straight track over the ground while keeping a constant heading. All right, now we're going to do hovering sideward flight. All right, so hovering sideward flight. Sideward hovering flight may be necessary to move the helicopter to a specific area when conditions make it impossible to use forward flight. During the maneuver, a constant ground speed, altitude, and heading should be maintained. Technique. Before starting sideways hovering flight, ensure the area for the hover is clear, especially at the tail rotor. Constantly monitor hover height and tail rotor clearance during all hovering maneuvers to prevent dynamic rollover or tail rotor strikes to the ground. Then pick 2 points of inline reference in the direction of sideward hovering flight to help maintain the proper ground track. These reference points should be kept in line throughout the maneuver. Begin the maneuver from a normal hovering altitude by applying cyclic toward the side in which the movement is desired. As the movement begins, return the cyclic toward the neutral position and maintain low ground speed, no faster than a brisk walk. Throughout the maneuver, maintain a constant ground speed and ground track with cyclic. Maintain heading, which in this maneuver is perpendicular to the ground, with the anti-torque pedals and a constant altitude with a collective. Use the throttle to maintain the proper operating RPM. Be aware that the nose tends to weather vane into the wind. Changes in pedal position will change the RPM, must be corrected by collective and or throttle changes to maintain altitude. To stop the sideward movement, apply cyclic pressure in the direction opposite to that of the movement and hold it until the helicopter stops. As motion stops, return the cyclic to the neutral position to prevent movement in the opposite direction. Applying sufficient opposite cyclic pressure to the level, the helicopter may also stop sideward movement. The helicopter then drifts to a stop. Common errors. Exaggerated movement of the cyclic, resulting in over-controlling and erratic movement over the surface. Failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control, resulting in excessive heading change. Failure to maintain desired hovering altitude. Failure to maintain proper RPM. Failure to make sure the area is clear prior to starting the maneuver. All right, so on page 6, hovering rearward flight. Rearward hovering flight may be necessary to move the helicopter to a specific area when the situation is such that forward or sideward hovering flight cannot be used. During the maneuver, maintain a constant ground speed, altitude, and heading due to the limited visibility behind a helicopter. It is important that the area behind the helicopter be cleared before beginning the maneuver. Use of ground personnel is recommended. Technique. Before starting rearward hovering flight, pick out 2 reference points in front of you and in line with the helicopter, just like the hovering forward. The movement of the helicopter should be such that these points remain in line. Begin the maneuver from a normal hovering altitude by applying rearward pressure on the cyclic. After the movement has begun, position the cyclic to maintain a slow ground speed, no faster than a brisk walk. Throughout the maneuver, maintain constant ground speed and ground track with the cyclic. Constant heading with the anti-torque pedals, constant altitude with the collective, and proper RPM with the throttle. To stop the rearward movement, apply forward cyclic and hold it until the helicopter stops. As the motion stops, return the cyclic to the neutral position. Also, as in the case of forward and sideward hovering flight, opposite cyclic can be used to level helicopter and let it drift to a stop. Tail rotor clearance must be maintained. Generally, a higher than normal hover altitude is preferred. Common errors. Exaggerated movement of the cyclic resulted in over-controlling in the uneven movement of the surface. Failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control resulting in excessive heading change. Failure to maintain desired hovering altitude. Failure to maintain proper RPM. Failure to make sure the area is clear prior to starting the maneuver. All right, what are we on? All right, so we'll go into taxiing. Taxiing refers to operations on or near the surface of taxiways and other prescribed routes. Helicopters utilize 3 different types of taxiing. Hover taxi. A hover taxi is used when operating below 25 feet above ground level, AGL. above ground level. Since hover taxi is just like forward, sideward, or rearward hovering flight, technique to perform it is not presented here. Technique. Nope. Air taxi. An air taxi is preferred when movement requires greater distances within an airport or heliport boundary. In this case, fly to the new location. However, it is expected that the helicopter will remain below 100 feet AGL above ground level with an appropriate airspeed and will avoid overflight of other aircraft, vehicles, and personnel. Technique. Before starting, determine the appropriate airspeed and altitude combination to remain out of the crosshatched or shaded areas of the height velocity diagram. Additionally, be aware of crosswind conditions that could lead to a loss of tail rotor effectiveness. Pick out 2 references directly in front of the helicopter from the ground path desired. These reference points should be kept in line throughout the maneuver. Begin the maneuver from a normal hovering altitude by applying pressure on the cyclic. As movement begins, attain the desired airspeed with the cyclic. Control the desired altitude with the collective and RPM with the throttle. Throughout the maneuver, maintain the desired ground speed and ground track with the cyclic. A constant heading with the anti-torque pedals. The desired altitude with the collective and proper operating RPM with the throttle. To stop the forward movement, apply aft cyclic pressure to reduce forward speed simultaneously. Lower the collective to initiate a descent into the hover altitude. As forward motion stops, return the cyclic to neutral position to prevent rearward movement. As approaching the proper hover altitude, increase the collective as necessary to stop descent at hover altitude, much like a quick stop maneuver. Common errors. Erratic movement of the cyclic resulting in improper airspeed control and erratic movement over the surface. Failure to use proper anti-torque pedal control resulting in excessive heading change. Failure to maintain desired altitude. Failure to maintain proper RPM. Overflying parked aircraft causing possible damage with rotor downwash. Flying in the crosshatch or shaded areas of the height velocity diagram. Flying in a crosswind that could lead to loss or tail rotor effectiveness. Excessive tail low altitudes. Excessive power used or required to stop. Failure to maintain alignment with direction of travel. So we'll hang off there. That is page 8 of 20. That was a taxiing. Yeah, we came into hovering rearward flight, hover taxi, air taxi, and surface taxi. We're going into surface taxi now. So we're on page 8 of 20. See ya.